What would a millionaire do when seeing an innocent young woman crying at a wedding? He walked up to her and whispered in her ear, "Be mine, just for one night." Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to know what happened after this bold proposal, subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support us. The ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, a sea of luxury and laughter that contrasted cruelly with the emptiness Emma felt inside. Tears threatened to betray her as she watched her sister Sarah twirl in the arms of her brand-new husband, the white dress trailing its train like foam across the polished marble. Emma clutched the champagne flute she had barely sipped, trying to ensure no one noticed how her fingers trembled beneath the weight of the worries she carried. Sometimes the most decisive moments of our lives come disguised as impossibilities, she thought, remembering her literature professor's words when she was just 17. Her navy blue dress, borrowed and with seams tired from overuse, seemed to whisper that she didn't belong in this world of hyphenated surnames and watches that cost more than her annual salary as a substitute teacher. She took refuge in the inner courtyard of the historic Upper East Side mansion, where the scent of jasmine mingled with the Manhattan night air. The ornate tilework told stories of bygone centuries beneath her feet, while she struggled with the stories of the present, unpayable medical bills, calls from the bank, and the increasingly pale face of her mother in the Columbia Presbyterian hospital bed. "The stars don't shine equally for everyone, do they?" The voice came from behind her, deep and with that accent that betrayed an international education. Emma turned to find herself facing grey eyes that studied her with curiosity. The man, impeccably dressed in a suit that exuded effortless elegance, held 2 glasses of champagne. "I brought you a fresh one. Yours seems to have warmed with your thoughts," he said, offering her the bubbling drink. "Thank you, but I don't need liquid charity," she responded, surprised by her own sharpness. The man smiled, and something in that smile seemed familiar to Emma, though she was certain she'd never seen him before. "It's not charity, Miss Mitchell. It's simple courtesy." Emma's heart skipped a beat. He knew her name. "Do we know each other?" "You don't know me, but I've seen you many times, reading Hemingway while waiting in Columbia Presbyterian's lobby. Your devotion to your mother is moving." A shiver ran down Emma's spine. Discomfort quickly gave way to alarm. "Who are you?" "Ethan Coleman." He introduced himself with a slight bow. "And I have a proposal that could solve all your problems." He stepped closer, just as the music changed to a traditional waltz. The candlelight cast dancing shadows on the century-old walls, and Emma felt as if the entire world held its breath. "Be mine, just for one night," he whispered, leaning close enough that only she could hear him. "And I'll pay all your mother's treatment debts." The words fell like stones into the pond of Emma's consciousness, forming ripples that threatened to drown everything she believed about herself. The cathedral clock struck 3 in the morning as Emma tiptoed into the small apartment in Brooklyn Heights. The cobblestone streets had been unusually silent during her walk from the last subway stop, as if all of New York were holding its breath, awaiting her decision. Ethan Coleman's proposal continued to reverberate in her mind like an echo in an empty cathedral. Her mother's room was in shadow, illuminated only by the greenish glow of the heart monitor they had managed to rent after moving heaven and earth. Margaret slept restlessly, her face a mask of deep lines that suffering had prematurely carved. At 58, she looked as if she had lived several lives, all of them hard. Emma knelt beside the bed, allowing tears to flow freely now that no one could see her. "What should I do, Mom?" she whispered, though she knew she would get no answer. The following morning arrived with the usual cruelty of workdays. Emma prepared coffee while mentally reviewing her schedule. 2 hours at the elementary school in Harlem, 4 at the high school in the Bronx, and then private tutoring until well into the night. Altogether barely enough to keep afloat a ship that was taking on water from all sides. The doorbell rang just as she was about to leave. Opening the door, she found a messenger holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. "Miss Emma Mitchell." She signed, confused, and closed the door. Inside the envelope was a card with elegant, precise calligraphy. "I expect you today at 7 p.m. at the River Cafe to discuss the terms of my proposal. It's not what you imagine. E.C." Attached was a second card with an address on 5th Avenue and a simple note. "So you feel comfortable at our meeting. The boutique has been notified." Emma crumpled the card in fury, feeling the blood boil in her veins. Who did he think he was? Did he really think he could buy her with expensive clothes and exclusive restaurants? But throughout the day, as she explained irregular verbs to disinterested teenagers and corrected tests in her scarce free minutes, doubt began to grow like a persistent vine. "It's not what you imagine," he had written. What if it really wasn't? The call from the hospital came at 5 in the afternoon. Dr. Taylor's voice sounded more serious than usual. "Miss Mitchell, I regret to inform you that we need to perform the procedure sooner than planned. Your mother's condition has deteriorated considerably." "How much time do we have?" Emma asked, feeling the world crumble beneath her feet. "A month, maybe less." And without the complete treatment, the words hung suspended in the air. There was no need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. At 6:55 p.m., Emma entered the River Cafe. The black dress she had chosen from the boutique was simple but elegant, and for the first time in years she felt beautiful. However, beauty was poor consolation for the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. Ethan was waiting at a discreet table with views of the Brooklyn Bridge. He stood up when he saw her, and something in his eyes, surprise, admiration, momentarily disconcerted her. "I'm glad you came," he said, pulling out her chair with a gesture that seemed natural, not studied. "Don't mistake my presence for acceptance, Mr. Coleman," Emma responded, her voice firm despite the trembling she felt inside. "I'm here to listen, nothing more." Ethan smiled slightly, as if her response pleased him. "Of course. And it's precisely that dignity that intrigues me about you." He ordered wine without consulting the menu, with the confidence of someone who knows each bottle by name. When the sommelier withdrew, Ethan crossed his hands on the table and looked directly at Emma. "Before explaining my proposal, let me clarify something. I'm not looking to buy your intimate favors," he said, carefully choosing his words. "What I need is much less romantic, but perhaps equally compromising for someone with your principles." Emma raised an eyebrow, her curiosity genuinely aroused. "Continue." "I need a respectable and cultured companion for a series of social and business events over the next 6 months. My solitary presence is complicating certain deals." The explanation fell between them like a stone in still waters. It wasn't what Emma had expected, but she still felt there was a trap hidden among his words. "Why me?" "New York is full of beautiful and cultured women who would be delighted to accompany you without the drama I evidently represent." Ethan sipped his wine before answering, savoring it with the same care with which he seemed to choose his words. "Because you are authentic, Miss Mitchell, and in my world that is the rarest and most valuable quality that exists." Attorney Harrison's office smelled of old leather and well-kept secrets. Emma watched the document lying on the mahogany desk with distrust, while her fingers nervously played with the pen she had been given. 3 days had passed since dinner at the River Cafe, 3 days of doubt, insomnia, and imaginary conversations with herself. "Read it carefully, Miss Mitchell," said the attorney, a man of about 60 with fine-framed glasses that gave him an intellectual look. "Mr. Coleman was very specific about the clauses he wanted to include for your protection." Emma looked up, surprised. "For my protection?" The attorney nodded with a slight smile. "Not all my clients are so considerate." Emma returned her attention to the document, reading each paragraph carefully. Indeed, the clauses established clear boundaries. No non-consensual physical contact, complete autonomy over her personal life, and the right to terminate the agreement at any time. The financial compensation was so generous that she had to read the figure twice to ensure there wasn't a mistake. "Why would he do this?" she murmured, more to herself than to the attorney. The door opened, and Ethan entered with that air of quiet authority that seemed to envelop him like an aura. "Why wouldn't I?" he replied, catching her question. "The terms benefit us both." Emma stared at him fixedly, trying to decipher the enigma this man represented. No one gives so much without expecting something equivalent in return. It's the first law of emotional economics. Ethan smiled at the phrase, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Have you considered that perhaps what I receive in return is worth exactly what I offer to me?" He sat across from her on the other side of the desk. The attorney, sensing the tension in the air, mumbled something about reviewing some documents and discreetly exited. "Mr. Coleman," Emma began, hardening her voice, I need to understand exactly what you expect from me. What I expect is detailed in that contract, he responded calmly. Your presence, your conversation, and your discretion. Nothing more. And if I refuse, then we'll part ways like two strangers who briefly met, and you'll continue your life as before. The veiled threat floated there, among the unspoken, and your mother will continue waiting for treatment that will never arrive. Emma looked out the window. From the 15th floor, New York spread like a golden tapestry beneath the afternoon sun. Somewhere in that urban labyrinth was her mother, counting the days without knowing it. I want to add one more clause, she finally said. Ethan raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Which one? If at any point I feel you're trying to manipulate me emotionally, the contract is void, but the financial compensation for my mother's treatment remains intact. A dense silence filled the room. For the first time, Emma saw something like respect shining in Ethan's grey eyes. Done, he said simply, extending his hand. Emma shook it, feeling a shiver run down her spine. She didn't know if she had just saved herself or condemned herself. That night, when she arrived at the hospital for her usual visit, she found her mother unusually awake and lucid. "What's worrying you, darling?" Margaret asked, with that maternal intuition that not even illness had managed to dim. "You have that wrinkle between your eyebrows, the same one your father had when something was eating him inside." Emma sat by the bed, taking her mother's fragile hand in hers. "How to explain the inexplicable? I've made a decision, Mom, one that will help us, but I'm not sure if Dad would approve." Margaret weakly squeezed her hand. "Your father was a man of firm principles, but also practical." Her voice sounded tired but clear. "He always said that dignity is important, but you can't eat it or pay bills with it." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes. "What if the price is too high?" "The only price too high is the one that robs you of your inner peace," Margaret responded, slowly closing her eyes. "I trust you, Emma. I always have." The Metropolitan Museum of Art glowed in the New York night like a palace of dreams. Emma descended from the Bentley that Ethan had sent to pick her up, feeling the weight of all eyes upon her. The dress she wore, borrowed from the Fifth Avenue boutique as stipulated in the contract, was a burgundy creation that seemed to have been designed specifically for her, embracing her figure with the delicacy of a lover and the respect of an artisan. This was her first public appearance as Ethan Coleman's official companion, and nerves knotted her stomach as she ascended the steps toward the entrance. The charity auction benefiting the New York Foundation for the Arts was one of the most exclusive events on the New York social calendar. Ethan awaited her at the top of the staircase, impeccable in his black tuxedo. When he saw her, something indefinable crossed his face, a flash so fleeting that Emma almost believed she had imagined it. "You look stunning," he said, gently taking her gloved hand to kiss it formally. "And you seem uncomfortable," she responded, catching the tension in his shoulders. "Do you already regret our agreement?" Ethan smiled, and this time the gesture seemed genuine. "Not at all. I'm just surprised at how convincing our association will be. Come, there are people I should introduce you to." What followed was a whirlwind of names, titles, and superficial conversations. Emma surprised herself by navigating with ease in that sea of etiquette and pretensions, thanks to her education and natural intelligence. She observed how women studied her with calculating eyes, trying to categorize her in one of their narrow mental categories: lover, fortune hunter, new passing conquest. "And how did you meet?" asked a middle-aged woman, the wife of an important developer, with a smile that didn't reach her Botox-injected eyes. Before Emma could invent something, Ethan gently intervened. At a used bookstore in Greenwich Village, Emma was heatedly arguing with the owner about the value of a first edition of Hemingway. It was fascinating to watch her demolish each of the poor man's arguments with the precision of a surgeon. Emma looked at him in surprise. The lie was elegant and curiously close to something she might actually have done. "Ethan exaggerates," she said, following his lead with a naturalness that frightened her. "I simply couldn't allow one of our greatest writers to be undervalued." The night progressed amidst flutes of champagne that Emma barely tasted, and artworks being auctioned for sums that could have fed entire families for years. In a moment of relative calm, she found herself alone before a disturbing Jackson Pollock painting, feeling a strange connection to those violent and desperate strokes. "You don't seem to be enjoying the evening," said a voice behind her. Emma turned to find an elegant woman about 50, with a severe haircut that framed an intelligent face. On the contrary, it's fascinating to observe how this world works, Emma responded cautiously. The woman smiled, studying her with interest. I'm Victoria Price, former partner of Ethan's, though he'd prefer to forget that detail. Emma Mitchell, she introduced herself, instinctively feeling she was facing someone dangerous. I know, Victoria responded. Everyone wants to know who the mysterious woman is who has managed to get Ethan Coleman to emerge from his self-imposed isolation. Emma kept her face impassive. There's no mystery, Miss Price, just two adults who enjoy each other's company. Victoria laughed softly. Darling, in this circle nothing is that simple. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Some advice: Ethan can be charming, but he has a special talent for destroying those who get too close. Ask his ex-wife, if you can find her. Before Emma could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. Victoria, what a surprise, he said, with a coldness Emma hadn't heard from him before. I didn't know you were on the guest list. There are always ways to get what one wants, Ethan. I thought I had taught you well. The tension between them was almost palpable. Emma felt she was witnessing only the surface of a much deeper and older conflict. If you'll excuse us, said Ethan, gently guiding Emma away. When they were at a safe distance, Emma stopped. Who is that woman, really? She asked quietly. And don't tell me just a former partner. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair in a surprisingly vulnerable gesture. She was my mentor, my partner, and, for a brief and disastrous time, something more. His eyes darkened. And she's the main reason my marriage failed. Emma felt an unexpected pang of something she refused to recognize as jealousy. I see, she said simply. No, you don't, he replied with sudden intensity. But someday, perhaps I'll tell you the whole story. He paused and added almost to himself, if you decide to stay long enough. When the Bentley dropped her off in front of her modest building in Brooklyn Heights, it was past midnight. Emma removed her heels before climbing the stairs to avoid waking the neighbors. Entering the apartment, she found a note from the night nurse. Your mother had a good day, Doctor. Taylor called to inform that they've moved up the preoperative tests to Monday. Emma collapsed onto the small sofa, still wrapped in the luxurious dress she had to return tomorrow. She removed from her purse the envelope Ethan had discreetly given her when saying goodbye. The first payment, enough to cover a full month of treatment and then some. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks as she contemplated the money. What was she really doing? What kind of game had she gotten herself into? And most disturbing of all, why, despite her misgivings, did she feel strangely alive for the first time in years? July spread its relentless heat over New York. Emma adjusted the blinds in her mother's apartment, trying to create a haven of coolness on that suffocating day. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since her first public appearance with Ethan, and since then they had attended 4 more events together. Each time she felt she better played her role as a sophisticated companion, as if she were developing a character for an endless play. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message from Ethan. Need to see you today. Important matter. Gramercy Park Hotel Cafe at 6 p.m. Emma frowned. They didn't have any events scheduled for today, and until now their meetings had followed a strictly professional agenda. Who is it? Margaret asked from the bed, where she was leafing through a magazine with better color in her cheeks after the first weeks of adequate treatment. Work, Emma replied vaguely. Her mother looked at her over her reading glasses with that expression that had always been able to see through her lies since she was a child. That work that makes you come home at all hours, smelling of expensive perfume and with a confused expression. Emma felt herself blushing. It's complicated, Mum. Life always is, darling. Margaret closed the magazine. The only thing that matters to me is that you don't lose yourself along the way. At 6 o'clock sharp, Emma entered the Gramercy Park Hotel Cafe, a bohemian locale frequented by writers and artists. It surprised her that Ethan had chosen a place so far from his usual circles. She found him at a table in the back, without the usual impeccable suit, but in dark jeans and a blue shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He seemed like another man, younger and less unreachable. Thank you for coming, he said when she sat across from him. I know it's unorthodox to meet outside our agreed commitments. The contract doesn't specify we can't have coffee, Emma responded, trying to keep a light tone. What's this important matter about? Ethan seemed unusually nervous, drumming his fingers on the table. "I've received an invitation to spend a week in the Hamptons, a retreat with the main investors in the Miami project, and I need you to accompany me." Emma felt the air leaving her lungs. "A week, together, in the same resort, not in the same room," he clarified quickly. "I know it goes beyond our initial agreement, which is why I'm prepared to offer additional compensation." Emma looked at him fixedly, trying to decipher what was really happening behind those grey eyes. "It's not about the money, Ethan." It was the first time she had used his name. "It's the image we'd project. A weekend is one thing, but an entire week." "I know," he interrupted, "and I wouldn't ask if it weren't absolutely crucial to close this deal." He paused. "Victoria will be there." Now Emma understood. The name of that woman had come up several times in recent weeks, always associated with mysterious obstacles in Ethan's business. "So I'm your human shield," she said bitterly. "No." His voice took on a sudden hardness. "You are my equal, someone whose presence I respect and value. And for reasons I don't completely understand, Victoria seems to retreat when you're present." Emma remained silent, weighing her options. Her week away would mean having to organize her mother's care, notify the schools, rearrange private lessons. When would it be? Next week. Impossible. I can't leave my mother for so long without adequate planning. Ethan nodded, not seeming surprised. "That's why I've taken the liberty of organizing some things." At Emma's alarmed look, he added, "Just possibilities, which you can completely reject." He took several documents from his briefcase. "Her private nurse 24 hours a day, the temporary transfer of your mother to a suite at Mount Sinai for greater comfort, and letters for your 3 schools explaining that you've been selected for an intensive educational program for 1 week. Emma looked at him between indignant and amazed. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? Are you always this controlling?" he completed with a tense smile. "Only with things that matter to me." The phrase hung between them, loaded with implications neither dared to examine. Finally, Emma sighed. "I need to think about it, and talk to my mother." "Of course." Ethan checked his watch. "I have to go now, but I'll be waiting for your answer." He stood up, but before leaving he added something that left Emma completely disconcerted. "By the way, there's a classic film session at the Angelica tonight. They're showing Bergman's Wild Strawberries. You always sit in the last row, don't you?" And without waiting for an answer, he left, leaving her with the feeling that this man knew much more about her life than he had revealed. That night, as she waited for the movie to start in her usual seat in the last row of the Angelica, Emma couldn't help constantly looking toward the entrance. But Ethan didn't appear. Upon returning home, she found her mother awake, despite the hour. "What's worrying you so much, darling?" Margaret asked, patting the edge of the bed for Emma to sit. "I've been offered to go to an educational conference, a week in the Hamptons. And the problem is," Emma took a deep breath, "that it's not exactly a conference, Mom. It's part of that job I haven't spoken clearly about." In the following minutes, Emma told her mother everything: the contract with Ethan, her role as a companion, the events, and the proposal for the following week. The only thing she omitted was the economic detail, unable to admit to her mother that she had basically put a price on her company. To her surprise, Margaret listened without interrupting, and when Emma finished, simply said, "I already knew." "What? How?" "Nurse Martinez is cousins with the clinic receptionist." Margaret smiled weakly. "And in this neighborhood, rumors travel faster than light. Besides, suddenly we can afford treatments that were impossible before. I'm not a fool, Emma." Emma lowered her head, ashamed. "I did it for you, Mom." Margaret took her daughter's hand in hers. "I know, and I'm grateful. But now I wonder if there's something more than the contract in this story." "What do you mean?" "I know you, Emma. You've always been as transparent as water. And now I see something in your eyes when you talk about this man, something that has nothing to do with contracts or money." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. Was there something more? Was she beginning to feel something for Ethan beyond curiosity and wary gratitude? "Go on this trip," Margaret finally said. "I'll be fine. And maybe you'll discover what you really want." The Hamptons Beach Resort stretched like a Mediterranean dream, on a cliff overlooking a small cove of crystal-clear waters. Emma couldn't help but hold her breath when Ethan's Mercedes passed through the wrought iron gates that gave access to the property. "Impressed?" he asked, observing her from the corner of his eye as he drove along the path flanked by century-old cedars. "Trying not to be," Emma responded with honesty. "This place seems taken straight out of a Fitzgerald novel." Ethan smiled. "Curious comparison. Are we then characters trapped in a tragedy of luxury and appearances?" "That depends," she said, looking out the window toward the sea that sparkled under the midday sun. "Who are you in this story? Gatsby or Nick Carraway?" "Perhaps a bit of both," he answered enigmatically. "The observer who yearns, the dreamer who doesn't fool himself." The conversation was interrupted when they reached the main entrance, where an army of uniformed employees rushed to attend to them. In a matter of minutes, Emma found herself being escorted to a suite that seemed larger than her entire Brooklyn Heights apartment. "Your room," explained the young woman guiding her. "Mr. Coleman's is at the end of the corridor." Emma nodded, grateful for the physical distance that reinforced the boundaries of their professional relationship. When she was alone, she toured the space with incredulity. A king-size bed covered with sheets that seemed like clouds, a private balcony with views of the sea, a marble bathroom with a tub that could comfortably accommodate 3 people. Her phone vibrated with a message from the nurse hired to care for her mother. "All good here. Mrs. Mitchell has eaten well and is now resting." Attached was a photo of her mother smiling weakly from the bed of the private room at Mount Sinai. Emma breathed a sigh of relief. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found an employee holding several boxes and garment bags. "Mr. Coleman requested that I deliver this to you," said the woman. "For the week's events." Emma wanted to protest but restrained herself. It was part of the agreement, presenting a certain image. When the employee left, she opened the boxes to find a selection of dresses, swimwear, and accessories that seemed designed specifically for her. The first official dinner was scheduled for that evening. Emma chose an emerald green dress that enhanced her olive skin tone and pulled her hair into a loose bun that let a few rebellious strands escape. Looking in the mirror, she hardly recognized the elegant and confident woman who looked back at her. Ethan was waiting for her in the lobby, conversing with a group of suited men. When he saw her appear, he interrupted what he was saying, and something in his gaze made Emma blush. "You look," he began, but seemed at a loss for words. "Presentable, I hope," she completed with a tense smile. "Much more than that," he responded, offering her his arm. "Come, there are people you should meet." Dinner took place on a terrace overlooking the sea, beneath a canopy of lights that seemed like domesticated stars. Emma observed, fascinated, the dynamics of the group. 8 couples, all connected somehow to the hotel expansion project in Miami. Ethan moved among them, with the grace of an experienced dancer, always careful to include her in conversations, always near, but maintaining an impeccable professional distance. It wasn't until dessert that Emma finally saw Victoria. The woman arrived late as one who knows her entrance will cause a stir, wrapped in a black dress that highlighted her still slender figure. At her side, a much younger man smiled with the vacant expression of someone who has been rented for the occasion. "Ethan, darling," said Victoria, approaching their table. "Sorry for the delay." Her gaze fell on Emma, assessing her coldly. "I see you continue with your educational philanthropy project." Emma felt the immediate tension in Ethan, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Victoria," he responded with icy courtesy, "I didn't expect to see you until tomorrow at the main meeting." "Oh, I decided to arrive early." She smiled, showing perfect teeth. "You know how I like to have time to explore the terrain." The conversation continued with that kind of tense exchange, disguised as courtesy that Emma had come to recognize as the lingua franca of the powerful. When Victoria finally moved away, Emma noticed that Ethan seemed physically exhausted. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, surprised by the genuine concern in her voice. "No," he answered with an honesty that disarmed her. "But I will be." Later, while the other guests headed to the bar or to their rooms, Ethan proposed taking a walk on the private beach. The night was warm, and the full moon cast a silver path over the calm sea. They walked in silence, until finally stopping near some rocks. Emma removed her heels to feel the sand between her toes, a small act of rebellion against all that sophistication. "May I ask you something personal?" she finally said. Ethan nodded. What really happened between Victoria and you? He sighed, looking toward the horizon, where sky and sea merged into an indistinguishable darkness. She was my mentor when I started in this business. She taught me everything, from how to behave in a meeting to how to identify an investment opportunity. And then, he made a painful pause, then I married Olivia, and Victoria couldn't stand it. She did everything possible to destroy our marriage, planting doubts, manipulating situations. His voice broke slightly. And she succeeded. Emma had never seen him like this, with his defenses completely down. "Did you love her?" she asked, not knowing whether she was referring to Victoria or his ex-wife. "I loved Olivia with all my heart," he answered. "And that was my mistake, allowing Victoria to see how much she could hurt me through her." "Where is Olivia now?" "In Argentina. She moved there after the divorce to be as far away as possible from all of this. From me." Emma remained silent, processing the information. Finally, she said, "Do you know why I accepted this deal with you?" Ethan looked at her, waiting. "Because in your eyes I saw the same loneliness I feel every day." Emma surprised herself with her own sincerity. "And I thought that maybe, just maybe, two lonelinesses together might be less lonely." Something changed in the air between them. A new, different tension. Ethan took a step toward her, and for a moment Emma thought he was going to kiss her. But instead, he simply took her hand and held it between his. "Thank you for being here," he said with a hoarse voice, loaded with contained emotions, not just by contract, but for being truly present. Emma felt a knot in her throat. What was happening between them? Was this part of the game, or had she crossed without realizing that invisible line she had promised to respect? The sound of approaching voices broke the moment. Ethan released her hand and stepped back, recomposing his expression. "We should go back," he said, recovering his professional tone. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As they returned to the hotel, Emma felt that something fundamental had changed, as if the script they had been following had new pages that neither of them had read before. The week in the Hamptons progressed with the precise cadence of a Swiss watch. Breakfasts on the terrace overlooking the sea, business meetings where Emma remained discreetly to one side, interminable lunches full of banal conversations, and elaborate dinners that extended well into the night. In the scarce free moments, Emma and Ethan had established a surprisingly comfortable routine. Walks through the gardens or along the beach, always maintaining appearances, but developing a complicity that went beyond what was stipulated in their contract. That morning, the fourth day of their stay, Emma decided to go down to the beach alone before breakfast. She needed to think, to clarify her increasingly confused feelings. The sun was barely rising on the horizon, tinting the sky with pink and golden hues that reflected on the calm sea. She sat on a rock, hugging her knees, while contemplating the small waves lapping the sand. What was she doing? Had she allowed this farce to become something too real? "Couldn't sleep either," Ethan's voice startled her. She turned to see him approach, dressed casually and with his hair still damp, as if he had swum at dawn. "I just wanted to see the sunrise," she responded, making room for him on the rock. "It's something I used to do with my father when I was a child." Ethan sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "What was your father like?" Emma smiled, surprised by the personal question. "He was a literature professor like me, but unlike me, he had a special gift for inspiring his students." Her voice softened with the memory. "He died when I was 20, a sudden heart attack. Sometimes I think that if he were alive, everything would be different." "How?" "He would have found a way to help Mom without—" She stopped, conscious of what she was about to say. "Without selling yourself to the highest bidder?" Ethan completed, with no trace of resentment in his voice. Emma looked at him, surprised by his frankness. "I didn't mean that. But it's what you feel, isn't it?" he insisted. "That somehow you've betrayed yourself by accepting this agreement." A heavy silence settled between them as the sun continued its ascent, bathing the beach with an increasingly intense light. "Sometimes," she finally admitted. "But then I remember that my mother is receiving the treatment she needs, that our apartment is no longer at risk of being seized by the bank, and that for the first time in years I can breathe without feeling like I'm drowning in debt." She paused. "And then I think that perhaps the true privilege is being able to afford certain principles." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand that better than you might think." His gaze was lost on the horizon. There was a time when I too had to do things that went against my principles to survive. You? Emma couldn't hide her surprise. But you were born into abundance. Ethan let out a humorless laugh. Is that what you believe? He turned to look at her directly. Emma, I grew up in a shared apartment in the Bronx. My mother cleaned houses and my father, when he was sober, worked as a night watchman. The revelation fell between them like a stone in still waters. But your name, your contacts. Coleman was my mother's maiden name. I abandoned my father's surname, Wilson, because it sounded better for business. His eyes had hardened with bitter memories. And I built my contacts one by one, sometimes in ways I'd prefer to forget. Emma looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm tired of pretending, at least with you. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. This week, every time you present yourself as my companion, I find myself wishing it were real, that there wasn't a contract in between. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Those words echoed her own confused thoughts. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps on the sand interrupted them. Victoria was approaching, impeccable even at this early hour, with a silk pareo over a discreet swimsuit. What a touching scene, she said with a feline smile, the lovebirds enjoying the sunrise. Ethan instantly stiffened. Good morning, Victoria. Ethan, darling, I need to speak with you privately. Her gaze briefly fell on Emma. Business matters, nothing that might interest your companion. Emma felt the immediate tension in the air. Whatever you have to tell me, you can say it in front of Emma, he responded firmly. There are no secrets between us. Victoria's smile widened. Are you sure? Because I have information about a certain property in Brooklyn Heights that might prove revealing. The color drained from Ethan's face. Give us a moment, please, he said to Emma, without looking at her. Emma stood up, confused and hurt by the sudden change. As she walked away along the beach, she could feel Victoria's triumphant gaze boring into her back. She didn't see Ethan at breakfast, nor at lunch. By dinner, the rumor of a crisis in the negotiations had spread among the guests like wildfire. Emma heard fragments of conversations, problems with permits in Miami, investors withdrawing, doubts about the project's viability. When Ethan finally appeared, he had the appearance of someone who had fought a devastating battle. He sat next to Emma at the table but seemed miles away. Are you okay? She asked quietly. No, he answered simply. I need you to pack tonight. We're leaving early tomorrow. What? Why? We were supposed to stay 3 more days. Something has come up. His eyes avoided hers. I can't explain now. Please trust me. The word trust resonated with bitter irony. How to trust someone who had just demonstrated that secrets continued to exist between them. That night, while Emma mechanically packed her belongings, a soft knock sounded at her door. Opening it, she found one of the hotel waitresses with an envelope. Mrs. Price asked me to deliver this to you, said the young woman before quickly withdrawing. Emma closed the door and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a set of old documents, property deeds, purchase and sale contracts, all related to a building in Brooklyn Heights. Her building, the building where she had grown up, where her mother still lived. And there, on the last page, was the signature of the original buyer. Richard Coleman, Sr. Emma felt the floor opening beneath her feet. The documents revealed that during the real estate speculation of the 2008 financial crisis, Ethan's family had acquired several properties in Brooklyn Heights, including the Mitchell's building, under at the very least questionable circumstances. The price paid had been a fraction of the real value, taking advantage of the economic desperation of many families. Did he know? Was this the reason he had appeared in her life, some kind of twisted expiation of family guilt? With the documents in hand, Emma left her room and headed to Ethan's. Social conventions and appearances no longer mattered. She needed answers. Upon reaching his door, she heard agitated voices inside. She stopped, with her fist raised, ready to knock. It's only a matter of time before she finds out, said Victoria's unmistakable voice. Do you think she'll forgive you when she knows her family's misery has your name stamped on it? I didn't know anything about this, responded Ethan, his voice tense with contained anger. My father died when I was 12. I never knew where the money came from for my education, for my mother's treatment. But now you know, and she will soon know too. Why are you doing this, Victoria? What do you gain by destroying the only good thing that's happened to me in years? Victoria's response was barely audible. Because if I couldn't have you, no one else will. Emma slowly backed away, feeling each piece of the puzzle fitting together in the most painful way possible. She returned to her room like a sleepwalker, holding the documents that now seemed to burn her hands. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process all the information. What should she do now? Confront him? Leave without saying a word? Continue as if she knew nothing? For the first time since beginning her agreement with Ethan, Emma felt she was completely alone, without any script to follow, without any contract defining the limits of her actions. And worst of all, despite the betrayal, despite the deception, a part of her still wanted to believe in him. The journey back to New York transpired in a silence so dense that Emma could feel it pressing against her skin. Ethan drove with his gaze fixed on the road, his white knuckles on the steering wheel betraying the tension consuming him. Emma looked out the window, observing how the coastal landscape gradually gave way to hills and finally to the first buildings of the city's periphery. She hadn't mentioned the documents. She hadn't revealed that she knew the truth. A part of her hoped, against all logic, that he would be the one to break the silence, the one to voluntarily confess the dark past that connected their families. But the silence persisted, mile after mile, like a third passenger between them. When the car finally stopped in front of Emma's building in Brooklyn Heights, Ethan spoke for the first time in hours. "I'll call you tomorrow. There are things I need to explain." Emma looked at him, searching his eyes for some clue of honesty, some indication that the man she had begun to know, to appreciate, was still there, behind the lies. "I'm not sure there's anything more to say," she finally responded. She took her suitcase from the back seat and exited the car without looking back, feeling the weight of the hidden documents in her purse as if they were made of lead. The apartment was empty. Her mother would remain in the private clinic for 2 more days. Emma dropped her suitcase in the entryway and headed directly to the window that overlooked the small square. From there, she could see the bench where her father used to sit to read the Sunday paper, the corner where she played as a child. The building that, she now knew, had passed into the Colemans' hands through machinations and exploitation. The phone rang, startling her. It was Sarah, her sister. "Emma, have you returned from your mysterious trip yet?" Sarah's tone distilled poorly disguised curiosity. "I just got back," Emma responded mechanically. "Are you okay? You sound strange." Emma hesitated. Should she tell her sister what she had discovered? Share the burden of this new knowledge? "I'm tired, that's all." "Are you sure that's all it is?" "Because there are rumors, Emma." "People talk." "What kind of rumors?" she asked, though she could already imagine the answer. "About you and that businessman, Coleman. They say you're his paid companion." The word Sarah avoided hung between them, ugly and accusatory. "And you believe them?" Emma's voice sounded harsher than she intended. "I don't know what to believe, Emma. Suddenly you have money for Mom's treatment. You're seen at high society events on the arm of one of New York's most eligible bachelors. What am I supposed to think?" "You could start by trusting me," Emma responded, anger bubbling beneath her apparent calm. "Or better yet, you could have offered help for Mom's treatment instead of spending a fortune on your perfect wedding." An icy silence followed her words. "That's unfair," Sarah finally said. "Jack and I have our own expenses, our own responsibilities." "And I don't?" Emma felt all the frustrations accumulated over years exploding at once. "Do you think it's easy maintaining 2 jobs, teaching until midnight, and still watching Mum get worse because we can't afford the treatment she needs? While you were worrying about the color of your wedding flowers, I was deciding which bills we could afford to pay this month." "Don't you dare make me feel guilty for being happy," Sarah responded, her voice trembling with anger. "It's not my fault you chose to carry all the weight alone, like some kind of martyr. And it's certainly not my fault you've now decided to sell your dignity to the highest bidder." The words hit Emma like physical slaps. Before she could respond, Sarah had hung up. Emma dropped the phone and slid to the floor, tears flowing freely now. Everything was falling apart. The charade with Ethan, her relationship with her sister, the fragile stability she thought she had built. It was all as fragile as a house of cards. The doorbell rang, startling her again. With her heart racing, Emma stood up and looked through the peephole, half expecting, half fearing it would be Ethan. but it was a stranger, an elegant woman in her 50s, with a bearing that revealed class and education. Cautiously, Emma opened the door. "Emma Mitchell?" asked the woman with a slight Argentine accent. "My name is Olivia Coleman. I believe we need to talk." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Olivia, Ethan's ex-wife, the woman who was supposedly in Argentina, far from all of this. Why? "Victoria contacted me," explained Olivia with a sad smile. "She said Ethan had found someone, and that I should come see for myself." Emma stood immobile, unable to process this new complication. "It's not what you think," she finally said. "Ethan and I have a professional agreement, nothing more." Olivia studied her with a penetrating gaze. "May I come in? This isn't a conversation to have in a hallway." Once inside, Olivia surveyed the small apartment with her gaze, not with disdain but with genuine curiosity. "So, this is where you grew up?" Emma nodded, confused. "How do you know that?" Olivia smiled slightly. "I know more than you might imagine, including the fact that this building was acquired by Ethan's family under questionable circumstances." "You knew?" Emma's surprise was evident. "Did Ethan know too?" "I discovered it during our marriage, when I began investigating the origin of the family fortune." Olivia sat on the small sofa, smoothing her skirt with an automatic gesture. "Ethan had no idea until very recently. His father died when he was a child, leaving his mother with a mysterious inheritance that, in reality, came from unethical real estate speculation." Emma sat across from her, trying to assimilate the information. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth before judging him." Olivia looked at her directly. "Ethan is not his father. When he discovered the origin of the money that paid for his education, his first impulse was to seek out all the affected families to compensate them. Is that what I am to him? A charity project? A way to ease his conscience?" "I don't think so." Olivia's voice softened. "I know him well enough to recognize when he's genuinely interested in someone. And the way Victoria talks about you two, well, she's always had an infallible radar for threats to her influence over him." Emma stood up, unable to remain still with all the emotions coursing through her. "This is crazy. You should hate him, not defend him." "Oh, I spent years hating him," Olivia responded with a soft laugh. "But time and distance bring clarity. Now I see that we were two people who genuinely loved each other, but never had a real chance. Not with Victoria determined to destroy us." She stood up too, approaching Emma. "I didn't come here to judge you or to interfere. I came because, despite everything, I still care about him. And because I recognize the look of someone trapped between heart and reason. I saw it in my mirror every morning for years." Emma felt tears threatening to spill again. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "All of this started as a business agreement, a way to get money for my mother's treatment. There weren't supposed to be feelings involved." Olivia gave her arm a gentle squeeze. "The heart rarely respects terms and conditions, Emma." She moved toward the door. "Just think about this. Is it worth losing something potentially beautiful because of mistakes that neither of you made?" When Olivia left, Emma remained alone with her chaotic thoughts. Everything she believed she knew had been called into question. The image she had of Ethan, of their relationship, even of her own family past, had all been transformed in a matter of hours. She approached the small bookshelf where she kept the family albums. She took one out, turning the pages until finding the photo she was looking for. Herself, at 8 years old, sitting on the entrance stairs of the building, with her father beside her, both smiling at the camera. That building, which she now knew, had passed into the Colemans' hands shortly thereafter. Could she forgive that? Could she separate Ethan from his father's acts? And, more importantly, could she trust a man who, despite what Olivia had said, hadn't been completely honest with her? The phone rang again. This time it was her mother's nurse. "Miss Mitchell, your mother is asking for you. She seems somewhat agitated." "Tell her I'll be right there," Emma responded, making a sudden decision. "And please prepare her things. I'm bringing her home today." She needed to get away from all of this, to focus on the only thing that had always been clear and true, her love for her mother. The rest, Ethan, the contract, the confused feelings, would have to wait. Or perhaps simply end here. As she gathered her purse to head to the clinic, Emma felt a mixture of resolution and sadness. She had begun this adventure believing she was only risking her time and her public image. She never imagined she would end up risking her heart. The apartment felt different with her mother back, physically smaller, but somehow emotionally larger, as if Margaret's presence filled the empty corners Emma hadn't noticed until now. 5 days had passed since the abrupt end of the week in the Hamptons, 5 days in which Emma had systematically ignored Ethan's calls and messages. At first they were frequent, almost desperate. Then, spaced out and more formal. Finally, silence. That August morning, the heat already felt oppressive despite being early. Emma prepared breakfast while her mother, notably recovered thanks to the treatment, read the newspaper at the small kitchen table. "Here he is again," said Margaret, pointing to a page. "Your businessman friend." Emma tensed but forced herself to approach and look. Indeed, there was Ethan, photographed at the inauguration of a new pediatric wing at Mount Sinai, entirely financed by his foundation. "He's not my friend," Emma responded dryly, returning to the kitchen. Margaret observed her over her reading glasses. "Are you going to tell me someday what really happened between you two?" Emma sighed, placing the toast on a plate. "There's nothing to tell. We had a professional agreement, it served its purpose, and now it's over. And that's why you startle every time the phone rings. That's why you stare out the window with that lost expression." "Mom, please." Margaret folded the newspaper and set it aside. "Emma, I know you better than anyone in this world. I know when something is consuming you from within." Her voice softened. "And I also know when you're in love." The word fell between them like a bomb. Emma almost dropped the coffee pot. "I'm not in love," she protested. But even to her own ears it sounded unconvincing. "It's complicated. Love always is." Margaret smiled sadly. "If it were simple, it wouldn't be worth it." "There are things you don't know," said Emma, finally sitting across from her mother. "Things about this building, about our family." "You mean how the Colemans acquired the property during the financial crisis speculation?" Margaret's calm left her speechless. "I've known that for years, darling." "What? How?" "Your father discovered the truth shortly before he died. He was investigating, preparing a lawsuit." Margaret sipped her coffee. "But then his illness came and he was gone so quickly. I didn't have the energy or the resources to continue the fight." Emma was stunned. All these years, her mother had carried this knowledge in silence. "Why did you never tell me? What would have been the point? It would only have added bitterness to your life, and you already had enough taking care of me and keeping this home afloat." Margaret reached for her daughter's hand across the table. "But now that you know, you must decide what to do with that knowledge." "I don't know if I can forgive him," Emma admitted, "even though he didn't know, even though he wasn't directly responsible. It's his family, his heritage. And are you going to condemn him for the sins of his father?" Margaret shook her head. "If we were all judged by the actions of our ancestors, darling, none of us would find redemption." The doorbell interrupted their conversation. Emma rose with a sigh of frustration, expecting to find a neighbor or perhaps the mailman. But opening the door, she found herself facing a young messenger holding a large envelope and a bouquet of wildflowers, her favorites, though she didn't remember ever mentioning that to Ethan. "Miss Emma Mitchell?" asked the young man. "I have a delivery for you." Emma took the envelope and flowers with trembling hands, closed the door, and returned to the kitchen, where her mother observed her with a raised eyebrow. "Seems like someone isn't willing to give up," Margaret commented with a barely contained smile. Emma placed the wildflowers on the table and opened the envelope. Inside was a set of legal documents and a handwritten note. "Emma, these are the building's property documents transferred to your name. It's not compensation. I know there's no way to truly compensate for what happened, but an attempt to correct an injustice that, although I didn't personally commit, deeply affects me. I don't ask you to forgive me or understand me. Just to know that, regardless of how our story began, what I feel for you is real and true, always yours. Ethan." Emma reviewed the documents with incredulity. Indeed, the entire building had been legally transferred to her name. The property her family had lost decades ago now belonged to her. "What is it?" asked Margaret, concerned by her daughter's sudden paleness. Emma passed her the documents in silence. As her mother studied them, she approached the window, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't just about the material value, which was considerable, but about the gesture itself. the acknowledgement of the injustice and the attempt to repair it. "Well," Margaret finally said, placing the documents on the table, "it seems we have a new landlord, or rather landlady." "I can't accept it," Emma murmured. "Why not?" Because I'd feel like he's buying my forgiveness, my affection." Margaret rose with effort and approached her daughter, taking her by the shoulders to turn her toward her. "Emma, look at me. This man isn't buying anything. He's returning what should never have been taken." Her eyes, so similar to Emma's, shone with a quiet wisdom. "And he's doing it without conditions, without expecting anything in return. That's not manipulation. It's genuine remorse." "But listen to me, darling. Life is too short to let pride stand in the way of happiness." Margaret's voice took on an unusual intensity. "I learned that the hard way. After your father died, there was a man, a colleague of his from the university. He loved me, and I think I loved him too. But it seemed like a betrayal of your father's memory, too soon, too complicated. So I pushed him away." Her voice broke slightly. "And not a day has gone by that I don't wonder what our lives would have been like if I had had the courage to take the risk." Emma had never heard this story. The revelation left her speechless. "Don't make my mistake," Margaret continued. "Don't confuse fear with principles, or pride with dignity." The phone rang, breaking the moment. Emma went to answer it with her heart racing, but it was only Sarah, her sister, calling to apologize for their previous argument. While listening to Sarah, Emma couldn't stop looking at the documents on the table, the wildflowers, the note with that last line that continued to echo in her mind, "Always yours." Was he? Did she want him to be? The confusion of feelings, resentment, gratitude, attraction, fear, was overwhelming. She needed time, space to think. After hanging up with her sister, Emma made a decision. "Mom, I'm going out for a while. I need to walk, clear my head." Margaret nodded with an understanding smile. "Go, and remember, sometimes the most difficult path is the only one worth taking." Emma left the apartment and began walking aimlessly through the neighborhood streets. The August sun fell relentlessly, but she barely noticed it. Her mind was too busy reviewing every moment, every conversation, every look shared with Ethan. From that first encounter at her sister's wedding to the week in the Hamptons, trying to separate what was real from what had been part of the contract. Her steps led her, almost unconsciously, to the Angelica Film Center. The marquee announced a Bergman cycle, precisely Wild Strawberries, that afternoon. The memory of Ethan mentioning that he had seen her there, always in the last row, hit her with force. She entered the air-conditioned lobby of the cinema, grateful for the respite from the exterior heat. She checked her watch. There was almost an hour until the screening. She headed to the small attached cafe and ordered a coffee, sitting at a secluded table to continue her internal debate. "Miss Mitchell." The voice startled her. She looked up to find herself face to face with Attorney Harrison, the same one who had drafted her contract with Ethan. "Mr. Harrison," she responded, uncomfortable. "What a coincidence." "Not so much of a coincidence," admitted the man, pointing to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" Emma nodded, intrigued and slightly alarmed. "Ethan asked me to deliver this to you personally," said the attorney, removing an envelope from his briefcase. "He said I would probably find you here or at the neighborhood library." "Is he following me?" Emma asked, indignant. "No, not at all. He simply knows your habits, as you yourself have confirmed." Emma took the envelope cautiously. "What is this?" "The formal annulment of your contract, releasing you from any pending obligations, along with confirmation that all payments made to date are yours without conditions." The attorney paused. "And there's also something personal that I haven't read." Emma looked at the envelope without opening it. "Tell me, Mr. Harrison, you who know him professionally, what kind of man is Ethan Coleman really?" The attorney seemed surprised by the question, but considered it seriously. "In my 30 years of practice, I've dealt with all kinds of powerful people. Most use their wealth as a shield, as a way to stay above consequences." He joined his hands on the table. "Ethan is different. When he discovered the origin of part of his wealth, he nearly ruined himself trying to compensate all the affected families. Not for public image, since he insisted on keeping the entire process in absolute secrecy, but out of a genuine sense of justice." He paused before continuing. "And in all these years I had never seen him so vulnerable as since you entered his life. The attorney rose, leaving Emma with her thoughts and the unopened envelope. One last thing, he added before departing. He doesn't know I'm here. I came on my own initiative because I believe you deserve to know the whole truth before making a decision. When the attorney left, Emma finally opened the envelope. As Harrison had said, it contained the legal documents terminating their contract, but also a more extensive handwritten letter than the previous note. With her heart racing, she began to read. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, you've probably already received the building property documents. I want you to know there are no conditions attached to that transfer. It's yours, regardless of what you decide about us. I also want you to know the complete truth. When I first saw you at Columbia Presbyterian, while visiting my physical therapist after a minor injury, I didn't know who you were. I was captivated by how you read Hemingway aloud to your mother while she slept, your devotion, your soft voice giving life to those verses. It was afterward, when I discovered the connection between our families, while reviewing old documents of my father's after my mother's death last year. At first, I only wanted to anonymously compensate all the affected families, but with you, I wanted something more. I wanted to get to know you, to understand what kind of person you had become despite the difficulties my family had helped create. The contract was a mistake, I know that now. I should have been honest from the beginning, but I was afraid you would automatically reject me if you knew the truth, and I desperately needed an opportunity to show you that I'm not like my father. These months at your side have been the most authentic of my life. For the first time, someone saw me for who I really am, not for my surname or my bank account. Your intelligence, your strength, your integrity have made me want to be a better person. I will understand if you cannot forgive my initial lack of honesty. I will understand if the shadow of the past is too great to overcome. But I want you to know that what I feel for you is real, and that I will be here waiting if you ever decide it's worth trying. With all my heart. Ethan. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she read the last lines. The letter trembled in her hands, and her mind was a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Could she believe him? Could she trust that this time he was being completely honest? And yet, did it really matter how everything began, if what they had built since then was genuine? The announcement that the movie was about to begin interrupted her thoughts. Automatically, Emma rose and headed to the theater, taking her seat in the last row as she always did. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits began, she felt someone occupying the seat next to her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She felt it, that unmistakable presence she had come to recognize, even in a room full of people. I should have guessed you would come, she said quietly. I always do, Ethan responded softly, since I discovered it was your favorite film. Emma finally turned to look at him. He seemed exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and an air of vulnerability she had never seen before. I read your letter, she said. And? On the screen, the elderly Professor Isaac Borg was beginning his physical and emotional journey toward reconciliation with his past. Emma felt a strange synchronicity with the story that was about to unfold. I don't know if I can trust you, she finally admitted. I don't know if I can separate what I feel from how everything began. Ethan nodded slowly, accepting her words without defending himself. I understand. He paused. I only ask for an opportunity to show you day by day that what we have is real. No contracts, no obligations, just two people trying to build something sincere from an imperfect beginning. Emma looked back at the screen, where Isaac Borg faced the ghosts of his past to be able to move toward the future. It won't be easy, she finally said. I know. And I can't promise you anything. I'm not asking for promises. The film continued unfolding before them, but Emma barely saw it. Her mind was occupied processing the decision she was about to make, balancing the risk of trust against the risk of regret. Finally, in a gesture so small yet so significant, her hand sought Ethan's in the darkness. When their fingers intertwined, she felt a strange sense of peace, as if she were finally taking the right path, however difficult it might be. She said nothing more. There was no need. In that simple contact was her answer. She was willing to try. September arrived in New York with that peculiar transition from summer to fall, where the heat still persisted during the day, but the nights began to cool, like a timid announcement of the change of seasons. Emma had returned to her classes at the schools, now with a less overwhelming schedule, thanks to her newly acquired economic stability. Her mother's treatment was progressing favorably, and the tensions with her sister Sarah had diminished after several frank conversations. As for Ethan, they had agreed to start anew, this time without contracts or formal obligations. They saw each other regularly, but with the caution of two people who know they are walking on fragile ground, building bridges of trust over an abyss of past doubts. That Sunday afternoon, Emma was waiting for Ethan at the small cafe in the square near her building. They had arranged to take a walk through the neighborhood, a simple activity that had become a sort of ritual for them, rediscovering together the streets of Brooklyn Heights, as if by traversing them they were also traversing the history that both united and separated them. Ethan arrived punctually as always, dressed simply but with that unmistakable air of natural elegance that seemed to accompany him even in his most casual moments. "Sorry for the delay," he said, though he wasn't actually late. "The traffic on Fifth Avenue was impossible." Emma smiled, observing how even now, when they were trying to build something genuine, some formalities persisted between them. "You're perfectly on time," she responded, rising to greet him. There was a moment of hesitation, a kiss on the cheek, an embrace. Finally, they opted for an intermediate gesture, a slight handshake that transformed into a brief interlacing of fingers. They began walking without a fixed destination, enjoying the lively Sunday atmosphere in the neighborhood streets. The cafes were full, families were out with children and dogs, and street musicians added notes of color to the urban symphony. "How's your mother?" Ethan asked, genuinely interested. "Better every day. Dr. Taylor says her response to the treatment is almost miraculous." Emma smiled. "Though I suspect it's more her own stubbornness than any medication." Ethan laughed softly. "Stubbornness seems to be a family trait," he commented, with a tone of affection that softened the possible offense. Emma feigned indignation. "We prefer to call it determination." They continued walking until they reached a small plaza that Emma didn't remember having visited before, despite being just a few streets from her home. In the center was an antique shop with a faded blue facade and a window full of varied objects. "Did you know this place?" she asked, intrigued. Ethan shook his head. "New York always holds secrets, even for those who think they know it well." Something in the window caught Emma's attention, an old edition of The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, with a worn but still beautiful cover. "Wait," she said, impulsively entering the shop. Ethan followed her, observing with curiosity as Emma examined the book with reverence. "Is it a first edition?" she asked the elderly proprietor, who watched them from behind a cluttered counter. "No, miss," responded the man, approaching. "It's a 1958 edition, published by Scribner's. Quite rare, but not a first." Emma nodded, carefully turning the yellowed pages. "My father had one just like it," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. "We lost it during a move years ago." Ethan observed her expression, the mixture of nostalgia and yearning that transformed her face. "We'll take it," he said suddenly. Emma looked up, surprised. "No, Ethan, it's not necessary." But he was already taking out his wallet. "Please allow me this small gesture," he said quietly. "Not as compensation for anything, simply as a gift I know you'll appreciate." There was so much sincerity in his eyes that Emma couldn't resist. She nodded, grateful, as the elderly man carefully wrapped the book in tissue paper. When they left the shop, the sun was beginning to decline, tinting the streets with a warm, golden hue that softened the contours of the buildings. "Thank you," said Emma, hugging the package to her chest. "It's a very special gift. Like you," he responded simply. They continued their walk, this time in the direction of Prospect Park, conversing about literature, music, and all those things they had discovered they shared during their previous professional encounters, but which they could now explore with greater freedom and honesty. Upon reaching one of the less frequented entrances of the park, Ethan suddenly stopped. "There's something I should tell you," he said, with a sudden seriousness that alarmed Emma. "Something I've been postponing because I feared your reaction." Emma felt her heart accelerate. Another revelation, another secret that would threaten the fragile trust they were rebuilding. "What is it?" she asked, trying to maintain her calm. Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been investigating my father's old documents, trying to trace all the properties acquired during that time." He paused. "And I discovered something about your father." Emma tensed. "My father? What does he have to do with all this? According to the documents, just before he died, your father had initiated legal action against my family. He had evidence, Emma. Evidence of how the properties were acquired, of the pressures and manipulations. Evidence that could have ruined my father. Emma felt like she couldn't breathe. My mother told me something like that, but I didn't know he had gone so far. He went very far, confirmed Ethan. And now I have reasons to believe that his death might not have been as accidental as it seemed. The world seemed to stop around her. Emma took a step back, as if physically struck by the words. What are you insinuating? Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm not sure, admitted Ethan, visibly anguished, but I found correspondence suggesting my father was desperate to silence him. There's nothing conclusive, but you believe your father might have had something to do with my father's death, Emma completed, feeling a sudden coldness throughout her body. Ethan didn't respond immediately, which was answer enough. Why are you telling me this now? Emma asked, struggling to maintain her composure. Why not before? Because I just confirmed it, and because I want there to be no more secrets between us, no matter how painful they may be. His voice was loaded with emotion. I'll understand if this changes everything, if it's too much to overcome. Emma took another step back, needing space to breathe, to think. I need time, she finally said. This is too much. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began to walk away rapidly, ignoring Ethan's calls behind her. Tears blurred her vision as she walked increasingly faster, almost running through streets that became blurry around her. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions and memories. Her father, always fair and brave, fighting to the end for what he believed was right. His sudden death that had shattered her family. And now the possibility that it hadn't been a simple accident of fate, but something much darker and deliberate. Without realizing it, her steps led her to Greenwood Cemetery, where her father's remains rested. Despite the late hour, the guard recognized her as a regular visitor and allowed her to enter. The tomb was simple, a grey marble headstone with the name of James Mitchell and the dates framing a life cut short too early. Emma knelt before it, letting tears flow freely now. What do I do, Dad? She whispered. How can I love the son of the man who might have taken your life? Only silence answered her question, a silence that weighed like a slab on her heart. She remained there until the shadows lengthened and the cemetery began to empty. Finally, with a last touch to the headstone, she rose and set out on her way back home. Upon reaching the apartment, she found her mother waiting with a worried expression. Ethan called, said Margaret without preamble. He sounded devastated. What happened? Emma dropped the Hemingway book on the table, now a painful reminder of what had seemed a perfect day. He believes his father might have had something to do with Dad's death, she responded in a flat voice. That it wasn't a natural heart attack, but induced somehow. Margaret paled, slowly sitting on the sofa. Oh my God! You knew? Emma asked, suddenly alert to her mother's reaction. Did you suspect something like this? Margaret shook her head, but there was a hesitation in her gesture that Emma knew well. I didn't know for certain, but it always seemed strange to me. Your father was in perfect health. He never had heart problems. And just when he was about to file his lawsuit, she stopped, unable to continue. Emma sat beside her, taking her hands in hers. Why did you never say anything? What could I say? I had no proof, only suspicions. And you were so devastated by his death. Margaret squeezed her hands. Besides, what would it have accomplished? It wouldn't have brought your father back. It would only have added more pain and anger to our lives. Emma nodded slowly, understanding her mother's difficult position. Silence settled between them, each lost in her own thoughts and memories. Finally, Margaret spoke again. The question now is, what are you going to do with this information? Emma looked out the window, toward the night that had fallen over New York. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to get away from everything related to the Colemans forever, but another part still loves Ethan, Margaret softly completed. Emma didn't deny the statement. It was useless to continue denying what she felt, what had been growing between them despite all the obstacles. It's unfair, she finally said. He's not responsible for what his father did. He didn't choose to be born into that family, just as I didn't choose mine. Life is rarely fair, darling. Margaret smiled sadly. But we always have a choice in how we respond to its injustices. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Emma hesitated but finally answered. "Hello. Emma, it's me." Ethan's voice sounded hoarse, as if he had been crying. "Please don't hang up." She remained silent, waiting. "I know you need time, and I respect that. I just wanted to tell you that whatever happens, I'll continue searching for the truth about what occurred. Your father deserves justice, even if that means confronting my father's legacy." He paused. "And I'll understand if this is the end for us." Emma closed her eyes, feeling tears threatening to spill again. "I don't know if it's the end," she finally said, "but I know I can't see you for a while. I need to think, to process all of this. I understand. But I want you to know that I value your honesty." The words came with difficulty. "You could have hidden it, and you chose not to." A silence, loaded with emotions, filled the line. "I love you, Emma," Ethan finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "And that's why you deserve the whole truth, even if it means losing you." Before she could respond, he had hung up. Emma stared at the phone in her hand, feeling her heart dividing between the pain of the past and the possibility of a future that now seemed more distant than ever. That night, as she tried to fall asleep, Emma remembered something her father used to tell her. "The truth always comes to light, my darling, and when it does, we must be prepared to face it with courage and compassion." Would she have the courage to face this truth, and the compassion to separate the son from the sins of the father? Only time would tell. October arrived with torrential rains that seemed to reflect Emma's mood. 3 weeks had passed since the revelation about the possible connection between Ethan's father and her father's death. 3 weeks in which she had kept her word of not seeing him, though he had respected her space by sending only a brief message every few days, simply to let her know he was still there, waiting. That afternoon, while grading exams in the small teacher's lounge of the Harlem Elementary School, Emma received an unexpected call. It was Olivia, Ethan's ex-wife. "I need to see you," she said without preamble. "It's important. It has to do with what Ethan told you about your father." Emma felt her heart skip a beat. "How do you know?" "He told me. He still trusts me for certain things, though that may surprise you." Olivia's voice sounded urgent. "Please, Emma, I wouldn't ask this if it weren't crucial." They agreed to meet in an hour at the Bryant Park Cafe. When Emma arrived, soaked by the rain despite her umbrella, she found Olivia already seated at a back table with 2 steaming cups of coffee in front of her. "Thank you for coming," said Olivia, as Emma removed her wet coat. "I know this must be uncomfortable for you." Emma sat down, studying the woman across from her. Olivia had that natural elegance that money can't buy, but also a warmth in her eyes that was comforting. "What's so important that it couldn't wait?" Emma asked directly. Olivia took a folder from her purse and placed it on the table. "I found this among the belongings I left in the house I shared with Ethan. I was there last week collecting some things, and these documents were in a box I had never opened." She pushed the folder toward Emma. "I think you should see them." With trembling hands, Emma opened the folder. Inside was a collection of letters, old photographs, and what appeared to be private investigation reports. "What is all this?" "Evidence that Ethan's father, Richard Coleman, indeed ordered an investigation of your father." Olivia pointed to one of the reports. "But there's also something more, something that not even Ethan knows yet." Emma began to review the documents, her heart accelerating with each page she read. The letters revealed Richard Coleman's growing concern about the investigation James Mitchell was conducting. In one of them, written just days before her father's death, Richard expressed his intention to definitively solve the Mitchell problem. "My God," Emma murmured, feeling like she couldn't breathe. "So it's true. He ordered—" "Not exactly," interrupted Olivia, pointing to the last letter in the pile. "Read this." Emma took the yellowed document. It was a letter from Richard Coleman, addressed to a certain William Parker, dated 1 day after James Mitchell's death. "The Mitchell matter has taken an unexpected turn. His death, though convenient for our interests, was not our doing. The medical report confirms a natural heart attack. Cancel any planned action. I repeat, do not act. The situation has resolved itself." Emma read the letter 3 times, trying to assimilate what it implied. "This suggests they were planning to do something, but my father's natural death preempted their plans," she finally said with a trembling voice. Olivia nodded. "That's how it appears. Richard Coleman was a ruthless man in business, capable of considering terrible actions, but this letter suggests he didn't actually execute anything against your father. Why are you showing me this? Emma asked, closing the folder. Why now? Olivia sipped her coffee before responding. Because I believe you deserve to know the complete truth, and because I've seen what this matter is doing to Ethan. Her eyes softened. I've never seen him like this, Emma. So consumed by guilt for something he didn't even do. So determined to do the right thing even if it means losing you. Emma remained silent, processing everything she had just discovered. The truth was complicated. Ethan's father had considered actions against her father, but apparently hadn't carried them out. James Mitchell's death, though convenient for the Colemans, had been natural according to this evidence. There's something else, continued Olivia, taking out one final document from her purse. Ethan has established a foundation in your father's name to fund literary studies, scholarships, and legal support for families affected by real estate speculation. He didn't want to tell you until everything was formalized. Emma took the brochure of the newly created James Mitchell Foundation for Social Justice. The irony was almost painful. The son of the man who had considered silencing her father was now honoring his memory and continuing his fight. I don't know what to say, she finally admitted. You don't have to say anything right now. Olivia stood up, preparing to leave. Just think about it, Emma. Ethan is trying to repair a damage he didn't cause. Honor a man he never knew because he knows how important he was to you. That says a lot about who he really is. When Olivia left, Emma remained seated in the cafe, watching the rain beating against the windows as she tried to order her chaotic thoughts. The truth, as always, was more complex than the simplified version she had been handling. Her phone vibrated. A message from her mother, asking what time she would be home. Emma responded automatically, but then, impelled by a feeling she couldn't completely define, she wrote another message, this one to Ethan. I need to see you. Can we meet at Bryant Park in an hour? The response came almost immediately. I'll be there. Despite the rain that continued falling, Emma headed to the park. There was something appropriate about meeting under that downpour, as if the sky itself wanted to wash away the past and offer a new beginning. She found Ethan waiting for her near the fountain, completely soaked, without umbrella or any protection, as if the water falling on him was some kind of personal penance. Seeing her approach, his face lit up with a mixture of hope and fear that caused a lump in Emma's throat. Thank you for coming, she said, stopping a few steps away. Especially in this weather. I would have come in the middle of a hurricane if you had asked me to, he responded simply. Emma took a deep breath. I've seen the documents Olivia found. The letter where your father mentions my father's death was natural, though convenient for him. Ethan visibly paled. I didn't know Olivia had that information. I was still investigating myself, trying to find the complete truth before... I've also seen about the foundation, Emma interrupted him. Why did you do it? He lowered his gaze, the water streaming down his face, mingling with what might have been tears. Because it was the right thing to do. Because your father deserves to be remembered for his courage, not forgotten for convenience. And because... His voice broke slightly. Because I know how much he meant to you. Emma took a step forward, shortening the distance between them. During these weeks I've been thinking a lot. About the past, about our families, about us. She raised her gaze to meet his eyes. And I've come to understand something important. We are not our fathers. Their actions, their decisions, don't define who we are. Ethan looked at her intensely, as if he feared she would disappear at any moment. When I discovered the possibility that my father was involved in your father's death, I felt like I had betrayed you in the worst possible way. His voice was barely audible over the sound of the rain, as if, by loving you, I was profaning your father's memory. My father valued justice above all things, Emma responded. But he also believed in people's capacity to choose their own path, regardless of their origin or surname. She paused, searching for the right words. I think he would have liked the foundation, and I think with time he might have come to respect you for who you are, not for who your father was. Lightning briefly illuminated the sky, followed by the rumble of thunder, but neither seemed to notice, absorbed as they were in each other. What does this mean for us? Ethan finally asked, the vulnerability clear in his voice. Emma extended her hand, gently touching his wet cheek. It means I want to try. For real. without contracts or obligations, without the weight of the past suffocating us. Just the two of us, here and now, building something new from the foundations. Ethan's expression slowly transformed, disbelief giving way to a hope so pure that Emma felt it squeeze her heart. "I love you, Emma Mitchell," he said simply. "With all that I am, with all that I have, I love you." "And I love you," she responded, the words finally freeing themselves from the prison where she had kept them confined. "Despite everything, perhaps even because of all we've overcome, I love you." Under the incessant rain, in the middle of a practically deserted park, Emma and Ethan sealed with a kiss the beginning of something no longer defined by the past, but by the promise of a future that, though uncertain like all futures, they would face together. The water falling on them no longer seemed like punishment, but a blessing, washing away inherited guilt and accumulated doubts, leaving only the essential truth of two people who, against all odds, had found their way back to each other. The office of the Harlem School District Superintendent smelled of freshly brewed coffee and old books. Emma waited nervously, mentally reviewing the points she wanted to present. After months of teaching as a substitute, she finally had the opportunity to present her project for a permanent comparative literature program. The door opened and director Barbara Thomas entered, an energetic woman in her mid-50s, known for her passionate defense of public education. "Emma, sorry for the wait." She sat behind her desk, putting on her glasses. "I've read your proposal and I must say it's impressive. Ambitious, but implementable." "Thank you, Director. I firmly believe these students deserve access to universal literature, not just as something to study, but as tools to understand their own place in the world." Barbara nodded, leafing through the document before her. "What intrigues me is how you plan to fund the field trips, additional materials and author visits. You know our budget is limited." Emma took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been both dreading and looking forward to. "I have a sponsor willing to fund the entire program for the next 3 years. She took a letter from her purse. "The James Mitchell Foundation has agreed to cover all expenses without conditions on the content or management of the program." The director took the letter, reading it carefully. "The James Mitchell Foundation, I hadn't heard of it." "It's relatively new," explained Emma. "It's dedicated to promoting social justice through education and legal support for families affected by real estate speculation." "And this foundation," the director looked at her over her glasses, "does it have any relation to Ethan Coleman, with whom you've been seen recently?" Emma maintained a steady gaze. "The foundation was established by him in honor of my father, but it's managed independently and transparently. I assure you there's no conflict of interest." Barbara studied Emma for a moment, as if evaluating not just her words but also her integrity. "I've known you since you were a student here, Emma. You've always been principled and committed to these kids." She set the letter on the table. "If you tell me this foundation is genuine and that the program will benefit our students, I believe you." Relief flooded Emma. "Thank you for your trust, Director." "Don't thank me yet," Barbara smiled slightly. "Now comes the hard part, convincing the school board." 2 weeks later, Emma emerged from the board meeting with a mixture of euphoria and exhaustion. After 3 hours of questions, objections, and debates, her project had been approved. Starting next semester, she would be the coordinator of the new comparative literature program, with a permanent contract and the opportunity to implement the pedagogical ideas she had been developing for years. Upon leaving the school, she found Ethan waiting in his car, with an expectant expression. "Well?" he asked as she approached. In response, Emma simply smiled and gave a thumbs up. Ethan got out of the car and embraced her, lifting her off the ground in a gesture of spontaneous joy that attracted curious glances from some students leaving the school. "I knew it!" he exclaimed, finally setting her down. "I knew you'd succeed. You're brilliant, Emma." "It wouldn't have been possible without the Foundation's support," she admitted. "The Foundation just provided the resources, the project, the passion, the vision. That's all yours." He looked at her with evident pride. "How shall we celebrate?" Emma checked her watch. "First I have to stop by home to see my mother. But afterward, I have an idea," Ethan interrupted with a mysterious smile. "Something special." That night, after sharing the good news with Margaret, Emma found herself following Ethan through the narrow streets of Greenwich Village. They had dined at a small family restaurant, where no one seemed to recognize them. enjoying the simplicity and intimacy they rarely found in more elegant places. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" Emma asked, curious about Ethan's secretiveness. "Patience," he responded, guiding her toward a dimly lit side street. "We're almost there." They stopped in front of an old building with a modest facade and a small wooden door. Ethan took out a key and opened it, inviting her to enter. Emma found herself in a narrow vestibule that gave way to a surprisingly spacious room, illuminated by ceiling lamps that emitted a warm light. The walls were covered with bookshelves full of books, and in the center were several tables and comfortable armchairs, like a private library. "What is this place?" she asked, amazed. It was an old exclusive reading club, founded in the 1920s. Ethan guided her to the interior. "I bought it a few months ago, when it was about to be converted into tourist apartments." Emma toured the room, running her fingers along the spines of the books, some clearly old and valuable. "It's beautiful, but why did you bring me here?" Ethan suddenly seemed nervous, something rare for him. "I wanted you to be the first to see it before its reopening." He gestured, encompassing the space. "It will be a cultural center open to the public, with special attention to children and youth from vulnerable neighborhoods, writing workshops, reading club, school support. It's a wonderful idea," Emma said sincerely. "And I'd like you to direct it," he added, carefully observing her reaction. "Along with your work at the school, of course. The schedules would be compatible." Emma was speechless. The offer was tempting, perfect even, exactly aligned with her passions and ideals. But it also represented a new level of commitment, not just to the project but to Ethan himself. "You don't have to answer now," he hastened to add, correctly interpreting her silence. "It's just an idea. The center will open regardless of your decision." Emma approached a window that overlooked a small inner courtyard, where an antique fountain softly murmured. "Why are you doing all of this, Ethan?" she finally asked. "The foundation, this center, my program at the school. It's too much." He approached, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm doing it because I believe in the vision you had for all these projects long before you met me, because I see the difference you can make in the lives of these children." His voice softened. "And if I'm completely honest, I also do it because it makes me happy to see you fulfill your dreams." Emma turned to look at him, studying his expression. There was no manipulation in his eyes, only a genuine vulnerability that continued to surprise her. "I'm afraid of losing my independence," she admitted, "of our personal relationship becoming too mixed with the professional, of everything falling apart if we ever end things." Ethan nodded, understanding. "It's a real risk," he acknowledged. "That's why the foundation is legally constituted with an independent board, and why this center will have its own directorate. These aren't personal gifts, Emma. They're institutions that will continue to exist regardless of what happens between us. You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I try to learn from my mistakes." He smiled slightly. "And one of the biggest was not considering your independence as something fundamental to you." Emma felt a wave of affection for this man who was trying so hard to understand her, to respect her boundaries even as he offered her the world. "I accept," she finally said. "I'll direct the center, but with one condition. Anything. That it's clear I'm here because of my merits, not because of my relationship with you." Ethan nodded solemnly. "That has never been in doubt, at least for me, and I'll make sure it isn't for anyone else." He approached slowly, giving her time to back away if she wished. But Emma didn't move, and when he took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers, she felt a strange sensation of certainty, as if all the doubts that had clouded their relationship were finally beginning to disperse. "There's something else I want to show you," said Ethan, guiding her toward a door at the back of the room. Opening it, Emma found herself in a smaller, cozier room with a single bookcase occupying an entire wall. Unlike the rest of the center, this one was empty, waiting to be filled. "This will be a space dedicated to your father," explained Ethan. "The James Mitchell collection. Books he loved, works he taught, authors he defended. A place where his passion for literature continues to inspire new generations." Emma felt tears welling in her eyes. The gesture went beyond anything material. It was a deep recognition of the importance her father had had in her life, a way to keep his legacy alive. Without words to express what she felt, she turned to Ethan, and for the first time, it was she who initiated the kiss. A kiss that spoke of gratitude, of forgiveness, of a future they were beginning to glimpse together. When they finally separated, Emma rested her forehead against his. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for this, but for understanding what really matters to me." "It's easy to understand," he responded softly, "because what matters to you is beginning to be the most important thing to me, too." They left the building hand in hand, walking through the nighttime streets of New York, with the tranquility of those who have found, at last, common ground on which to build something lasting. They were no longer the businessman and the teacher joined by a contract, nor even two people trying to overcome a painful shared past. They were, simply, Ethan and Emma, rediscovering themselves in a present they had freely chosen and walking toward a future that, though uncertain like all futures, they would face together. The dim light of the bedside lamp illuminated Margaret's face as she rested against the pillows. At 60, she finally seemed to have recovered some of the sparkle that illness had stolen from her. Emma observed her from the doorway, with a mixture of relief and anxiety. "Mum, are you sure about this?" she finally asked, entering the room. Margaret looked up from the book she was reading. "About selling the apartment and moving to a house in Martha's Vineyard?" "Completely sure," she smiled. "This place is full of memories, some wonderful and others painful. But I think we both need a new beginning." Emma sat on the edge of the bed. The last few months had brought significant changes: her permanent job at the school, the direction of the cultural center, and a relationship with Ethan that, though still navigating complex waters, strengthened day by day. "Besides," Margaret continued with a spark of mischief in her eyes, "the house has 2 independent apartments. You can have your space, and I'll have mine. Privacy for everyone." "Mom, that's not why I'm hesitating," Emma protested, though she couldn't help blushing slightly. "No?" Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Well, it should be. It's perfectly natural that you want to spend time alone with Ethan. You're not a teenager anymore, Emma." "Mom!" Emma didn't know whether to laugh or hide under the bed. "We're not talking about this." "Well, we should be." Margaret closed her book, adopting a more serious tone. "You've spent so much time taking care of me that you've postponed your own life. Now that you finally have the opportunity to be happy, I don't want to be an obstacle." Emma took her mother's hand. "You've never been an obstacle. You're my family, and I'll continue to be no matter where I live." Margaret squeezed her hand. "But now you also have Ethan. And though I never thought I'd say this about a Coleman, I believe that man really loves you." Emma smiled. If someone had told her a year ago that her mother would approve of her relationship with the son of the man who possibly contributed to her father's death, she would have considered it madness. But here they were, discussing moves and new beginnings. "All right," she finally conceded. "If you're sure, we'll sell the apartment, but with one condition, that you choose the house in Martha's Vineyard. I want it to be a place where you feel truly happy." Margaret smiled, with that smile that had always been able to illuminate even Emma's darkest days. "Deal." The next day, while Emma prepared her class at the Cultural Center, she received an unexpected visit. Victoria Price, Ethan's former partner and declared enemy, entered her office without announcing herself. "Miss Mitchell," she said, with that feline smile Emma had learned to distrust. "What a quaint place you've created here." Emma immediately put herself on guard, but maintained a cordial tone. "Ms. Price, what a surprise. How can I help you?" Victoria surveyed the office with her gaze, evaluating each detail as if she were appraising a property. "I've heard that you and Ethan have become inseparable. My congratulations." Her tone made it clear there was nothing to congratulate. "I've also heard you're considering selling your family apartment." Emma frowned. They had barely made that decision the night before. How could Victoria know? "I don't see how that could interest you," she responded coldly. "Oh, it interests me very much. You see, I have an offer for you." Victoria took an envelope from her elegant purse. "I'm willing to buy that apartment for double its market value, in cash." Emma looked at her with disbelief. "Why would you do something like that?" "Let's say I have a sentimental interest in that building." Victoria's smile became almost predatory. "And I'm willing to be very generous to obtain what I want." Emma took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a check for an amount that indeed doubled the value of her apartment, along with a purchase agreement already prepared. "There must be some catch," said Emma, studying the documents. "Nobody pays double without a hidden reason. The only condition," Victoria approached, slightly lowering her voice, is that you don't mention this offer to Ethan. This is an agreement between you and me, exclusively." And there was the trap. Emma set the documents on the table. "Why so much secrecy? What are you really trying to do, Ms. Price?" Victoria sighed theatrically. "I see Ethan has been very effective in brainwashing you." Her tone hardened. "I thought you were an intelligent and independent woman. Or do you now need his permission even to sell your own property?" The provocation was evident, but Emma wouldn't fall for it. "My independence is precisely in being able to choose who I share my decisions with, and for now I choose not to do business with you." Victoria slowly collected the documents. "It's a pity. You really could have started a new life with that money, without owing anything to the Colemans." She headed toward the door but stopped before leaving. "When you tire of being Ethan's charity case, my offer will still stand. Think about it." After she left, Emma remained seated, trying to understand what had just happened. Why was Victoria so interested in her apartment? And why did she insist on keeping it a secret? That afternoon, while dining with Ethan at a small restaurant in Soho, she told him about the unexpected visit. "It's strange," she said, absently stirring her risotto. "Why would she want to pay double for an apartment in a building that, frankly, needs renovation?" Ethan had visibly paled while listening to her account. "It's not the apartment she wants," he said finally. "It's to provoke a conflict between us." "How?" "Think about it. She offers you an exorbitant amount, but with the condition that I not know." Ethan set down his fork. "If you had accepted, eventually I would have found out, and she would have made sure it looked like you had deliberately hidden it from me." Emma considered the explanation. "It makes sense, but it seems like a very elaborate plan just to cause trouble in our relationship." "Victoria is that twisted." His expression became serious. "But there's something else I should tell you about her, something I should have told you long ago." The sudden formality in his tone alarmed Emma. "What is it?" Ethan took a sip of water, as if preparing himself. "Victoria and my father had a relationship. Not just business, but personal. Very personal." "They were lovers?" Emma asked, surprised by this new revelation. "More than that. She was his right hand in everything, including—" He paused, visibly uncomfortable. "Including the murkiest business dealings, the dubious acquisitions, the pressures on property owners, everything." Emma was beginning to understand. "You're saying she might know more about what happened to my father?" Ethan nodded slowly. "It's more than likely. In fact, I'm almost certain that if anyone knows the whole truth about what really happened, it's her." A tense silence fell between them. Emma felt the world wobbling beneath her feet again, just when she was beginning to find balance. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. "Because I was afraid." The honesty in his eyes was painful. "Afraid that if you started investigating in that direction, you'd discover something that would definitely destroy any possibility between us." Emma processed his words, feeling a mixture of understanding and disappointment. "I need to know the truth, Ethan. The whole truth. I can't continue building something on foundations of doubt and uncertainty." He extended his hand across the table, seeking hers. "I know, and I promise we'll find it together, whatever it may be." Emma hesitated a moment before taking his hand, but finally did so. Despite everything, she trusted him. Not his family past, not the secrets that might still be hidden, but the man who had demonstrated time and again his willingness to confront that past for her. "Together," she confirmed. The following days were an emotional roller coaster. With the help of Olivia and attorney Harrison, they began tracking documents, interviewing former employees of Richard Coleman, and reconstructing the events surrounding James Mitchell's death. One afternoon, while reviewing files in Richard Coleman's old office, now part of the Foundation's facilities, Emma found something. A box marked simply as M. Matter, hidden in the back of a closet. "Ethan, I think you should see this," she called, feeling her heart beating hard. Together they opened the box. Inside was a collection of documents, surveillance photographs and recordings on old tapes, all related to James Mitchell and his investigation into the Colemans' real estate practices. With trembling hands, they played one of the tapes on an old player that Ethan had specifically acquired for this investigation. Richard Coleman's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. "Mitchell is becoming a bigger problem than we anticipated. His findings about Brooklyn Heights could extend to other properties. We need a definitive solution. Then Victoria's unmistakable voice. I have contacts who could take care of him in a discreet manner. No? Richard's voice sounded firm. No violence. There are other ways to silence a man. Emma and Ethan looked at each other, the tension palpable between them. Keep listening, he said with a strained voice. The recording continued, now with later dates, advancing to the day of James Mitchell's death. Something unexpected has occurred. Victoria's voice sounded almost disappointed. Mitchell has suffered a heart attack, natural according to the doctors. Are you sure? Richard asked. It wasn't induced in some way. Completely sure. I have contacts at the hospital. It was natural, though convenient. Good. Richard seemed relieved. We cancel any other action then. Luck has been on our side. Emma turned off the recording, unable to continue listening. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. Ethan approached but stopped, unsure if his touch would be welcome at this moment. I'm so sorry, Emma, he said, his voice broken. It wasn't them, she interrupted, wiping away her tears. Not directly, at least. They were planning something, but my father died before they could act. Ethan seemed confused. You're not angry? I'm furious, Emma clarified, but not with you. With your father, with Victoria, with a system that allowed people like them to play with others' lives as if they were pieces on a board. She breathed deeply. But I also feel a strange relief. I finally know the truth, the whole truth, and though it's painful, it liberates me. They looked at each other across the room with the ghostly voices of their fathers still floating between them. But for the first time, Emma felt those voices no longer had power over her present, over her choices. What do we do now? Ethan asked, leaving the decision in her hands. Emma looked at him, seeing not the son of Richard Coleman, but the man who had had the courage to confront his family's dark past, who had been willing to lose her for the truth. Now, she said, crossing the distance between them, we start anew. No secrets, no inherited guilt. Just you and me deciding who we want to be, regardless of who our fathers were. Ethan embraced her, and Emma felt something inside her finally settling, as if a long, incomplete puzzle had found its last piece. Later that day, as they walked together along the edge of Central Park, Emma made a decision. I want the recordings and all the documents we found to be part of a public archive, she said, for the truth to be known about how certain people operated during those years of speculation. Are you sure? Ethan asked. It will expose not just my father, but many political and business connections. There will be consequences. I'm sure. Emma stopped, looking toward the park. My father dedicated his last days to seeking justice. The best way to honor his memory is by continuing that fight. Ethan nodded, interlacing his fingers with hers. Then we'll do it together. And come what may. As the sun set over the park, Emma felt a strange peace. The path here had been tortuous, full of painful revelations and difficult decisions. But for the first time in a long time, she felt completely in control of her destiny, free from the weight of the past that had conditioned her choices for so long. And beside her was Ethan, not as a magical solution to her problems, not as a savior with a fortune, but as a companion in this complicated journey we call life. An imperfect man, with his own baggage and his own struggles, but who had chosen to face them with honesty and courage. I love you, she said simply, the words now flowing effortlessly, not despite our history, but with it. With all that we are, with all that we've gone through to get here. And I love you, he responded, with every part of my being. The park continued its eternal rhythm before them, reminding them that even the most complex stories are but a moment in the immensity of time, and that what truly matters is not where we come from, but where we choose to go together. A year had passed since that afternoon when Emma and Ethan discovered the complete truth about the past that intertwined their families. A year of changes, growth, and above all, building something new upon the foundations of a reconciled past. The cultural center that Ethan had created had become a reference point in New York, offering educational and artistic programs to children and youth from all neighborhoods. The James Mitchell collection had grown to include not only his favorite books, but also a historical archive on real estate speculation and community resistance, where the recordings and documents they had found occupied a central place. Emma had flourished in her dual role as a teacher at the school and director of the center. She had published her first book, a compilation of stories based on testimonies from families affected by speculation during the years preceding the financial crisis. And, perhaps most importantly, she had found a balance between her professional and personal life that had always seemed unattainable to her. Margaret had adapted wonderfully to life on Martha's Vineyard. Her health had improved considerably with the sea air and the tranquility of the small coastal town. She had formed a reading group with other women in the neighborhood, and to Emma's surprise, had begun a friendship with Olivia, who frequently visited the coast. As for Ethan and Emma, their relationship had evolved with the naturalness of what is meant to be. They lived primarily in New York, in an apartment in Tribeca that they had decorated together, combining both their tastes. But they spent weekends on Martha's Vineyard, in the independent part of Margaret's house, enjoying the tranquility of the sea and family company. That July afternoon, while Emma finished organizing the details of the course-closing event at the Cultural Center, she received a message from Ethan. "I have a surprise for you. Tonight at 9. Wear the blue dress I like so much. I'll come pick you up. I love you." Emma smiled, intrigued. It wasn't her birthday or their anniversary. What could he be planning? At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found Ethan impeccably dressed in a suit she hadn't seen before, holding a bouquet of jasmine, flowers whose scent had always reminded Emma of the summers of her childhood. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing her softly, "and you're very mysterious." Emma took the flowers, inhaling their fragrance. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "Patience." Ethan smiled. "It's part of the surprise." The car took them through the streets of New York until stopping in front of a place Emma immediately recognized, the historic Upper East Side mansion where, almost 2 years ago, they had attended her sister Sarah's wedding, where everything had begun. "What are we doing here?" she asked, confused. "Completing a circle," Ethan responded enigmatically, offering her his arm. Upon entering the building, Emma noticed it was unusually quiet and dimly lit, with candles creating an intimate and romantic atmosphere. Ethan guided her to the inner courtyard, the same one where he had made that proposal that would change their lives forever. But this time the courtyard was transformed. Hundreds of tiny lights hung from the ceiling like earthly stars, and in the center was a table for two, elegantly set. "What is all this?" Emma asked, moved by the detail. "I thought it was appropriate to return to the place where we met." Ethan led her to the table. "Though technically we had already seen each other at the hospital, but that's another story." They dined beneath that sky of lights, conversing about everything and nothing, as only two people who know each other deeply and simply enjoy each other's company can do. The food was exquisite, but Emma could barely concentrate on it, intrigued by what it all meant. When they reached dessert, Ethan seemed to suddenly become nervous, something rare for him. "Do you know what day today is?" he asked. Emma did a quick mental review. "Wednesday." Ethan laughed. "Besides Wednesday, it's the day when, exactly 1 year ago, you published the documents about my father and yours, exposing the truth regardless of the consequences." Emma nodded. She remembered it well. It had been a difficult but liberating decision. "On that day," Ethan continued, "you showed me once again your courage, your integrity, and your commitment to truth above all else. And it was then that I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you." He rose from his chair and, to Emma's complete surprise, knelt before her, taking a small velvet box from his pocket. "Emma Mitchell," he said, his voice firm but laden with emotion, "we began this story in the most unlikely way, through secrets, contracts, and inherited guilt. But what we found along the way was something no legal document could ever define or limit." He opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring with a small emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I'm not offering you a perfect life because we both know it doesn't exist. I offer you my commitment to build each day something better than the day before, to face together whatever comes, and to love you with the same intensity with which you defend your principles." He took a breath. "Would you do me the honor of marrying me?" Emma felt time stopping. In her mind, like a fast-forwarded film, passed all the images of their journey together, from that first encounter in this very courtyard to the painful revelations, the reconciliations, the moments of joint construction. And then, with absolute clarity, she knew her answer. "Yes," she said, with tears of happiness in her eyes. "Yes, I want to marry you, Ethan Coleman." He placed the ring on her finger, his own eyes bright with emotion. When he stood up, Emma rose as well, and they melded in an embrace that seemed to contain their entire shared history. Suddenly, soft applause resonated in the courtyard. Emma separated herself, surprised, to see emerging from the shadows her mother, her sister Sarah with her husband Olivia, and several of her closest friends and colleagues. "Everyone knew," she began, looking accusingly at her mother. Margaret approached, radiant. "Anne missed the opportunity to see my daughter left speechless for the first time in her life? Not a chance." The night became an impromptu engagement celebration with champagne, soft music, and animated conversations. At one point during the evening, Emma moved slightly away from the celebration, needing a moment of solitude to process everything that had happened. She found herself in a corner of the courtyard, beneath a jasmine whose flowers perfumed the night air. Ethan found her there, as if he had a special radar to detect her. "Everything okay?" he asked, approaching with concern. Emma smiled, taking his hand. "More than okay. I was just thinking about how, sometimes, life takes us along paths we would never have consciously chosen, to lead us exactly where we needed to be." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Do you know what your mother said when I asked for her blessing?" he asked. "Knowing my mother, something tremendously direct and probably embarrassing." He laughed. "She said, if 2 years ago someone had told me my daughter would marry the son of Richard Coleman, I would have thought the world had gone mad. But now, I believe it's exactly as it should be." Emma rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, feeling a deep inner peace. "She's right," she murmured. "It is exactly as it should be, not despite our past, but including it, with all its shadows and its light." Above them, the stars shone in the New York sky, silent witnesses to a story that had begun with a cold and calculating contract, but had blossomed into something much deeper and truer. A reminder that sometimes the most authentic connections arise from the most unlikely beginnings, and that true love doesn't ignore the past, but integrates it and transforms it into foundations for the future. "By the way," said Emma, looking at Ethan with a playful smile, "you never answered my question that night on the beach. In this Fitzgerald story we're living, are you Gatsby or Nick Carraway?" Ethan pretended to consider it seriously. "I think I began as Gatsby, trapped in my own illusions and fantasies." He looked at her tenderly. "But you taught me to be more like Nick, to see reality as it is, to accept it and still find beauty in it." "I like that answer," said Emma, leaning in to kiss him, "though I think we're writing our own story, not following someone else's." "And what title would you give it?" he asked, playing with a lock of her hair. Emma thought for a moment, looking at the jasmine falling softly from the branches above them, its scent mingling with the night breeze. "Tears of Jasmine," she finally answered. "For all the tears we shed, and for how even in the bitterest moments there was always a hidden sweetness waiting to be discovered." Ethan embraced her tightly, as if wanting to merge with her. "I like it," he whispered against her hair. "It's perfect." And so, beneath the jasmine and the stars, Emma and Ethan sealed not only their commitment to marriage, but also the promise to continue building together a story that, though born in extraordinary circumstances, had become something as real and deep as the roots of the century-old trees that surrounded them. A story not of perfection, but of authenticity, not of forgetting, but of reconciliation, not of escaping the past, but of the courage to transform it into the foundation of a shared future. And in the soft murmur of the wind among the leaves, they could almost hear the voices of their fathers, finally at peace, blessing this union that transcended old grudges and healed ancient wounds. A reminder that sometimes the truest love is that which is born not from fairy tales, but from the courage of two people who choose, day after day, to walk together through the complexities of real life, holding the light for each other when the path darkens.